Advocacy podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy. This is Series 1 of Conversations with Women in African Philanthropy, a CAPSI program known as Adɔyɛ. The series was recorded at the sidelines of a retreat that took place at the Wits Rural Facility in Limpopo in January 2025, hosted by CAPSI's Adɔyɛ program and Nawi AfriFem Collective. Adɔyɛ is dedicated to celebrating and amplifying the contributions of African women in philanthropy while creating spaces for dialogue, learning, and collaboration. Adɔyɛ operates under the Center on African Philanthropy and Social Investment, aligning its mission with broader goals of promoting effective philanthropic practices in Africa. Through its efforts, Adɔyɛ seeks to build knowledge, foster dialogue, cultivate partnerships, and advocate for policies that support women in philanthropy.
Welcome to our first episode of our Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Beginkos Moyo, in the year 2025. Today I'm very excited to be shooting this episode from the sidelines of a writing retreat that has brought together well-experienced women from all over the continent who are taking time to reflect, think about the work that they've been doing, and document their stories. Right now, I'm joined by Brenda Mofya, who is the head of the Oxfam International office in New York. Brenda, welcome to the Conversations.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And I was asking how we pronounce your last name, Mofya, and you said it should be pronounced like mafia. So I was intrigued, actually, and the reason why I was intrigued is because I actually think that most of us who work in the civil society sector, we have in one form or the other been fighting different forms of mafias. And in your case, you have dedicated your life for decades and decades on activism, especially around issues of peace building, conflict resolutions, human rights, international relations, among others. Let's start talk maybe about what you are doing right now in New York, representing Oxfam International. For a couple of years now, you moved from Addis to New York to represent and head the office there. What is the kind of work that you are doing as an individual, but also as an institution, especially for people that follow Oxfam International from a distance, but don't have that intimate relationship?
So actually, Becky, I've just commemorated my 3rd anniversary in the role as Oxfam International representative to the UN in New York. So basically, I am the representative of Oxfam, the entire confederation of 21 affiliates or independent organizations, as we usually say. So of those 21 independent organizations, we do have several of them that are from the north and a few of them from the global south. With Africa, we only have one affiliate, which is Oxfam South Africa. We're hoping that there will be more affiliates joining. So I represent those affiliates' work. I believe everyone knows what Oxfam does. It's an aid organization, initially started as a humanitarian organization in Great Britain, in Oxford, but increasingly it's become an organization whose mandate is clear, that of fighting inequality, for poverty and injustice. So our work centers on, in New York, with my team, we are influencing policy around inequality and to fight poverty and injustice. So that's one part of the work. It's basically just representation. As and when Oxfam wants to engage the UN, then myself and my team are there to ensure that that happens sufficiently and effectively and impactfully. However, another part of my work is that of policy influencing itself. So I take on a number of issues that speak to that broad mandate of inequality and poverty eradication and injustice. It's very broad. But we're working around issues of peace and security. We're also working on gender justice, on climate change, and then also on representation, civic space, citizens, contribution to policy. I'm very deliberate, coming from the Global South. I find it oftentimes very compelled to meaningfully bring that voice and experience of the Global South, and my own experience as well in those spaces. So basically, it's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, based in New York, interfacing with the UN, you are probably one of the very few organizations and individuals from civil society perspectives who might be described as being at the coalface of global issues. And recently, we just came out of the UN Summit for the Future, and I know that Oxfam International and yourself were involved in several discussions. Maybe pick out a couple of maybe sessions or meetings or issues that stood out for you as an individual, but also as Oxfam representative.
Yeah, the New York space is very interesting, both from the member state representation, but also from a civic space representation, in the sense that it's really dominated by the Global South, by the Global North, in terms of putting across the agendas, but also dominating the outcomes and the negotiations of the issues that are discussed. So as Oxfam, we've tried to be very clear in terms of decolonizing that space, or bringing very strongly the global majority, which is the Global South, right? Be it Africa, be it Asia, be it Latin America, and ensuring that that voice is brought but also supported. So I work a lot with member states, from the global majority, from Latin America and the other regions, especially Africa, where I find a lot of comfort as well as networks. But then also we're deliberate at bringing the voices of the affected communities. So in terms of the Pact for the Future, the Summit of the Future, I came into the space at a time when that was the agenda, if anything, the only agenda. Yeah. 2022, when I moved there, already everyone was talking about the Summit of the Future. That initially was supposed to happen in 2023, which then got postponed to 2024. I was shocked when I came, in the sense that our member states were essentially very absent in the conversations when I attended those spaces that included member states. There were just a few that you could point out as being there and speaking out, the likes of, I think, Egypt, South Africa, a couple also being present, who oftentimes were just there to point out commas and full stops, interestingly. But then with the civil society as well, it was almost none from the global majority, from the Global South. They were absent. So it was at a point where the scoping was not even clear. By scoping, I'm referring to, there was agreement and consensus that was supposed to be a process that would lead to UN reform, acknowledging that the UN is not only ineffective, but it's also not sufficiently representative of the world as we see it today, and it's also not tackling the real issues that are affecting people, right? So when I came into the space, the scoping conversation needed to bring out strongly the actual issues that the reform needed to touch on, as well as the institutions that needed reform. But like I said, it was very North heavy. So as a learner in that space, one of the contributions that I made was insisting that we invite the Global South, institutions from the Global South. So I spearheaded through the Coalition for the UN We Need, the invitation of such organs as the AU ECOSOC, and then many other civil society from the global south was also not only invited in the spaces, but also deliberately informed of what was happening. So my office and my team as a contribution, we really tried to do that. An outcome of that was contributing to convincing the UN to actually hold a civil society meeting that was then held in Nairobi. Africa as a choice, but also African civil society and African constituencies invited and contributing to that. We still have a lot to say about the outcomes of the Summit of the Future, but it did happen. And as Oxfam, we really are at the center of trying to see how the commitments around the UN Security Council are met. We're mobilizing around that, mobilizing around the issue of the big elephant in the room, the issue of the veto powers, and generally just representation and making sure that Africa in particular is represented. We want to mobilize, right, citizens, understanding that apartheid was never defeated until people were mobilized. So it's a combination of efforts, being in the room, present all the time, but also we're trying to be very deliberate in informing the masses and mobilizing the critical masses of people to come, women especially. Happy to be here because I'm hoping that the writers also pick up that as well.
Yeah, we'll get to that in another segment. So I think CAPSI and maybe other several Global South institutions will attest to the work that you are doing, because I, for example, have been assisted by Oxfam International to get accreditation to attend UN main sessions. And I think we might actually not see the value of that, but for most institutions that are very far from New York, the very idea that they can even get accreditation is far-fetched from them. And the work that you do to facilitate just accreditation, even before we talk about the content, that is something that I wanted to give credit to you and your team, because I have benefited from that, and I know other people that have also benefited. It's been so much easier for us to get, endorsement from Oxfam International, and we just go onto the portal, and there we are, we've been accredited. Talking about accreditation, I also wanted to credit this cloth here. I'm told it's a gift from Nyamal to Masego. And Masego actually says this was her first outfit for Bola Nangabe, which is her clothing line, was made from this cloth. So I wanted to make sure that we credit Nyamal and we also credit Masego. Brenda, you are probably one of few people that have had, I would say, outsider perspective. So before you went to New York to head Oxfam and be I would say, the person that leads the team that engages with the UN, you were actually part of an intergovernmental organization, the AU. Let's talk about the time when you were at the AU working for the Political Affairs Department. How was it like? Some of us have very negative, I would say, criticism of the AU. We have worked on several issues jointly with you and your teams, but you then went in there at some point, and now you are on the outside with civil society again. Let's talk a bit about your experiences, the issues that occupied you at the time when you were at the AU.
So I think let me take it now to explain a little bit about my background. Now, I always that I'm one of the few people that are lucky to actually study regional integration. My background as a lawyer, I trained in Zambia, and then I studied in Germany and did European and integration law. So with that background, I've taken a lot of time in understanding policy making and the entire thread change in terms of policy, the interlinkages between the local, the national, the sub-regional, and the global. And the impact of regional decisions and global decisions to the local context that many people don't. I've had several conversations with colleagues that have insisted that we should concentrate on what is happening, the change that is only happening at local level, and we should ignore the global because nothing comes out. And I take a lot of time in explaining that it's all interconnected. You ignore one part, then you just, you don't achieve anything unless you are present at all. So that said, a reality many times that when decisions are made at AU level, then our governments bring those back home and implement them, and we don't connect. Similar to the Sustainable Development Goals, year in, year out, our national plans and policies reflect and align to the commitment. So I've influenced the African Union from outside, as you rightly point out, because of that persuasion and understanding that we need to pay attention to what is coming out of the African Union, and we need to find pathways to make sure that those decisions are reflective of the challenges of ordinary people and the realities of the ordinary people, and the voice is included of ordinary people. So when I worked for Oxfam and other organizations in the African Union, actually a lot of people think I only worked for Oxfam, know me as Brenda Oxfam, but I went into Addis Ababa as a representative of Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Yeah. That's another conversation because I got fired there, but we can talk about it later. I got fired not because of my performance, by the way. If anything, I think I achieved a lot during my time with FES because it was during that time that I was able to produce the APSA handbook. I think the first African peace and security architecture handbook. I produced it through that time, and I also helped FES sign an MOU to enable them to have a formal relationship with the African Union. So I'm just putting this because I was fired because I challenged certain things, racial discrimination issues. So with Oxfam, I think. Understanding that there ought to be inclusion, there have to be alignment to the voices. One of the things that we tried to do was to awareness building. We understood that Africans needed to know about the existence of the African Union and the pathways of how they could get involved in the matters of the African Union, but again, influencing. When I went into the African Union, particularly the Peace and Security Department, the then Peace and Security Department, I brought something which was very unique. A lot of times we assume that the experts that are working inside are aware of a lot of things, but in fact they're not, right? So I went into the African Union Commission Peace and Security with a wealth of network, among civil society, as well as analysis and knowledge, I think, which we oftentimes, as people that are in the trenches, underestimate. So I coordinated the European Union support program to the African Peace and Security Architecture, which was essentially a huge financial support to the African Union Commission as well as 5 regional economic communities. So basically the SADC, COMESA, EAC, UMA, ECOWAS were also involved in the implementation of programs, peace and security programs, in a very coordinated way. So my program and myself as the coordinator, we made sure that using this funding, there was identification of interventions. It was given to the regional economic communities and regional mechanisms. There's a difference between economic communities and regional mechanisms. The mechanisms are, we're talking about the East African Standby Force, those are mechanisms, and NAC, the Northern Africa Similar Entity. So we were funding those as well, interventions, various interventions in early warning, in the implementation of the African Standby of gender, women, peace and security. And the other thing that I also tried to do was to strongly bring in support towards civil society. So we were able to fund the AU ECOSOC through that mechanism, significantly, by the way, to try and see how civil society can also contribute to that partnership of ensuring that, you know, our continent is peaceful and citizens are listened to.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe part of what I also want to get into is, you know, as you are speaking, I'm realizing that the issues may not exactly be the same, but you are still probably dealing with the same challenges right now at a UN level, where you are trying to get voices of civil society, citizens into that policy arena, but also into the, you know, the international order. But at the AU level, we also had similar issues about how to get civil society engaged, and we are talking about ECOSOC, which is one of the agencies, or one of the, I would say, structures of the AU. But there was a time when civil society was really battling to actually even get access to the AU. And I think part of what I remember about you and the team then was when we were starting to set up the CCPAU, the Center for Citizens Participation with the African Union, and many others. And again, before you went into the AU, you have already said you were representing different institutions as a liaison person for Oxfam, but also for EFS. What is it that still remains the same since that time, and you are seeing similar traits and similar mechanisms or resemblances at the AU, I mean at the UN level now?
Yeah. You know, being in this space for a long time can be very, it has its own triumphs, and it also has its own challenging moments. Like you rightly put it, I think there was a time in Addis when civil society was very organized, very mobilized, and were meaningfully engaging in AU policy-making spaces, but also during key moments, you know, such as the AU summit. It was a space of engagement. It was also a space of meaningful policy conversations and networking. I think during that time, it was still clear that despite the mobilization that was happening, many civil society weren't seeing the outcomes of their efforts. And I think it's because of, partly because of the relationship that I think still exists today between African politicians or decision makers or representatives with their own citizens. Oftentimes they come into Addis with no deliberate effort in getting the mandate from the citizens, making decisions on behalf of the citizens, and not even going back to represent, to inform the citizens on what was agreed upon. And sometimes they inform you without having consulted you. Yeah. So a lot of time, so that existed then. A mobilized civil society, but very little satisfaction in terms of what the outcome of the efforts. We still continued, even then, seeing conflicts across the continent and many other challenges, despite the efforts of the AU. At some point, and this is also where I think we need to write and reflect on experiences, at some point we saw demobilization happening. We haven't interrogated that. I have my own theories of what might have happened, or certain decisions that might have led to that, where citizens just disappeared from the AU corridors and AU decision making. And that, I think, still continues now, the efforts, but not to the magnitude. So for me, I think as long as we don't unlock this relationship of the citizen and its representation, the African Union as an organ, as it speaks to the citizens as well. You know, at the time of transformation from OAU to AU, we were promised that the African Union was coming in now to be a people's union. Has that happened? To what extent? I think those are real and meaningful questions that need to be interrogated. So comparing that to New York, and this is me trying to be both a feminist, which now I'm unapologetically referring to myself as, and a Pan-Africanist, right? Comparing Addis to New York, I think there's more engagement of citizens with decision makers in New York as opposed to Addis. And I think the African Union has a lot to learn from the New York space in terms of invitation and deliberateness in having the citizens engaging. And I think that for me, this is what has changed in Addis. Should we sit back and just allow the situation to continue? I don't think so. I think we need to challenge all of us to regroup and see how we can reclaim that space and reclaim our union.
You know, so as you are speaking, Brenda, I'm looking back and thinking, and I'm trying, my head has been running around. I'm trying to look at, you know, so when you look at where you are and the journey that you have traveled, especially, I will come back to the time when you were at the Center for Peace Initiatives and stuff, but I'm looking at the time when you are interfacing with the AU, whether you are representing Oxfam, EFS, and at Oxfam it was different roles, right? Campaigns and all this, and then the UN now, and then AU. Do you see another group of people who you could see yourselves in, who are being groomed to do exactly what you've been doing, especially from the civil society sector, people who are moving back and forth like you have done? Because I am trying to think, who else do I know who has done exactly what you have done?
There's a lot that I haven't done, Becky, which I still want to do. But to try and answer your question, which I don't think I've fully understood, but to try and answer your question, one of the things that I'm learning in my journey is that it's very important that we come into spaces as individuals more than anything. I mean, I've worked with academic institutions. I have worked with local organizations. You know, my first employment or recognizable employment, so to say, although I was a volunteer then, was as a student lawyer for Zambia Civic Education, right? And many other spaces. So I've done local, sub-regionals. You mentioned Center for Peace Initiatives in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe also, I worked with different organizations, with AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, and I also tried to establish an institution in Zimbabwe, and many other spaces. I think one of the things that I've learned in this journey is that we need to really come in as individuals and interrogate our own contributions. And I think that's what I've always tried to do everywhere I've gone. And it's a challenge. Like you meet a lot of resistance, but you need to push, define what change you want to effect, and bring in everything that you have to make sure that change happens. And I achieved a lot. Looking back in time, the things that I achieved were inside the African Union were things that people thought were impossible to achieve. But I came in with my own persuasion and my own experience and insisted that, change is effected by individuals and it ought to happen. It continues within Oxfam. It continues within the space where I am. If we had a lot of time, I can point out to some of the experiences that I continue experiencing and how I'm challenging them. From having situations where a certain invitation has been had to bring voices of affected communities, and you're told already that, don't bring that country and don't bring that country, and yet those countries are the most affected. So what do? You challenge that. If it fails, you create an alternative, right? Yeah. But the issues of agency are things that I'm interrogating a lot. What is agency? Even when we talk about agency, right? What does it mean? What does decolonial mean when you are using resources that are coming from elsewhere? How do we mobilize? I'd want to hear more about your efforts in philanthropy as well, because it's all connected, right? It's all connected. So I've been lucky to have different experiences. I've worked in Europe, I've now in America, in Africa, but everywhere, believe me, I take Africa.
So I think there were two things. One is, yesterday when we were coming from the game drive, we're talking about how, things remain the same, but there's no reason why we should stop engaging. And from what you are saying is, from outside, most people might think, engaging with these institutions is a waste of time. But you go inside and you realize there are certain things that you can actually change. And you are actually saying there are so many things that you were able to change. So I think there's a myth that we need to bust. And that myth is that, we should leave these institutions as they are because they are useless anyway. But actually, when you get inside there, one of the things that you said is we always assume that people inside know what they are doing. At times they don't. So we need people from outside, civil society, the trenches, private sector, to get in there and make some changes. But secondly, is this issue of making sure that there's a pipeline of new actors. As we move up, others come in. And I think that's where I was saying, do you see any efforts around making sure that there is succession when it comes to people like yourself moving up and opening up spaces at the AU where you were? I don't know. I'm not that close now. I don't know. But do you see any efforts that are done, not necessarily by you, but by institutions whose mandate is to engage and change policies at that level?
I wouldn't claim to have been that deliberate in terms of succession. But I also see that whatever I may have undertaken or pursued has not been achieved by me as an individual. And it continues to be the case. I believe in the value of networking, and I have benefited a lot from networking. So my answer to that is that I think networking is the answer, and being deliberate should be the solution in making sure that we create, as Brenda is moving elsewhere, we create a replica of Brenda, or we support somebody to be in that space where whatever Brenda was doing continues. I think we've been failures in doing that. Recently we had, at a meeting with some comrades that have been working in the African Union, who were working around the African Union during the era that you talked about, where we were all engaging. We recently met and admitted actually that we seem to be the only ones being called upon to talk about the African Union. We haven't been deliberate in creating a core of young people that take on the mantle Many of us, we get tired, we move on, and there's no continuation. I think it's a challenge that is there, but I think it's something that we need to all collectively be deliberate. And all collectively, I'm referring to the colleagues that have had my similar experience and similar path. It hasn't just been for the institutions and civil society. I think it also has been with the, the funding institutions, the foundations. They have drawn a lot of our comrades into those spaces and left a gap. And it's also been governments.
Yeah.
I mean, many of us have been activists today, and tomorrow we're in the government, and we leave a vacuum. Those vacuums are not being filled. Yeah.
So I know we are scratching the surface, Brenda. And the reason why I'm doing that, I'm being deliberate, is because I know you are here for a reason. And part of the reason why you flew from your holidays to come to Mpumalanga, right in the bush, is to start reflecting and documenting some of these experiences. And so I wouldn't want us to get into super detail, because I'm assuming there's a book coming out soon. So let's talk about why you are here. And before we get into that, I want also to credit Nyamal and Tandy for designing what you see here. So we always appreciate creativity that happens. And so this morning, as we're thinking about setting up, we just had volunteering in Nyamal, Tandy, putting everything together. You see the designs here with books, bottles, and flowers. So this is part of the creativity that has been, I'm sure, brewing here in the last week or so. So let's talk about why you are part of this writing retreat. And to set it the context, this is an initiative that Maseko, Koto Williams, Christelle from Nawi, Tandy from Kapsi put together to facilitate space for women from all over the walks of life who want to write but usually don't find time to do so, to actually start the year out here in Mpumalanga at the first rural facility with some assistance from resource people, but also the facilities, to just try and reflect and document. And obviously you are not going to write everything in the 2 weeks. The idea was to just bring people together for networking, but also to have people that can help you with how to write, what to write, when to write, etc. So let's talk about you and how you come in.
This has been an incredible opportunity, I must say. Just being here and among these incredible women, listening to their stories, sharing their journeys, has been remarkable. The objectives of the retreat and the circle is something that need to be recommended or commended. It's bringing women who have experienced life as many of us have, and not sharing it in a manner that it can be, the lessons can be drawn upon, has been something that our continent continues not benefiting from. Our journey as African women is that of individual and collective struggle, so to say, and just this effort. And many times we are continuously in this struggle where we don't even get the time to write and reflect. Later on, even reflect on our experiences. So finding myself here and being challenged to share my story and also draw from other participants, and also be challenged to actually begin to write or finalize the writing, has been so meaningful for me. I am still thinking, and I've started writing, by the way, And certainly I think the book will come out someday. But I'm still thinking of what exactly, for a journey and for a life that I've led, it even, you are challenged to know the angle, like where do I even start from, I think has been the challenge. But for me, it's even more, this opportunity is even more meaningful in the sense that I'm turning 50 this year. So it's an incredible opportunity to reflect on 50 years of being on this earth and experiencing what I have experienced. It's really such a great opportunity, and I hope that this won't end with our circle. First of all, I am not letting these ladies go away, so I will be one of those people that will insist that we stay together and we continue this journey and we walk it through. But I'm also hoping that this effort, this initiative doesn't just end with this cohort, but rather we should see more women given the similar opportunities to actually go through this. And at the beginning of the year, like you said, and reflect and begin writing. Yeah.
So first, welcome to the fifth floor. I'm sure you have heard about the Becky philosophy at 50. Briggs told you about it. At 50, you just don't care. You just do whatever you feel like doing. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And then, of course, secondly, for those that are listening and hearing, you speak about your reflections and, maybe struggling to even know where to begin because of the multitude of experiences that we have. What are some of the things that people should potentially look forward to reading in the work that you are producing?
So I've decided to write a letter to my daughter. And that letter, like I said, will definitely incorporate the different experiences that I've had in the last 50 years of my life, of existence. But I also touch on issues of identity, but on also multi-existence in different spaces, comradeship, friendships, and also just a collective of struggles, in different spaces. But I'm very political, so expect a lot of political nuances in that account. And all will be a lesson to my daughter, but also women that will come after her as well. So I initially wanted to only look at a particular angle, but now I'm realizing I think a letter to my daughter brings in everything. It brings all the experiences there. So a book is coming, Becky.
Great. Thank you so much. And obviously, I wouldn't end without asking you to talk about this. I know that you are very patriotic. I always see your writings whenever something happens, whether it's in New York or it's in Zambia. You are one of the first people to have an honest opinion and engagement with your government. Maybe let's talk a bit about your political views and how and where you want to see Zambia and many African countries going.
I'm learning, Becky, that ignorance is bliss. Knowledge is just problematic. The more you know, the more you want others to know. And the more you become troubled by certain events. So with the Zambian government and with many other, with the continent, that we get to a point where our countries and our peoples reclaim their agency and also meaningfully work to making the lives of citizens and people better, right? I'm not seeing that in Zambia happening, despite the many changes that we've had. I am increasingly becoming very troubled by the fact that, endured, for a people that have for many years struggled to ensure that, the basic freedoms are achieved. None of that is happening. We're seeing regime after regime being changed, who are making decisions that are not reflective of the challenges of the people, but whose decisions are increasingly reflecting, interest, so to say. There's a lot that we can say on that, but I can, and I'm not shying on this, I can say this on camera, that I'm very, very troubled by what is coming from our current leadership of Zambia. I think both a betrayal of the people of Zambia, but it's also increasingly becoming a betrayal of the people of Africa. Yeah. And,
on that note, Brenda, I know you're a hopeful person. You talked about a letter to your daughter. So your daughter is there, and there are many other daughters. There is the camera. What would you want to say to them?
So to my daughter Nandi, and to many other daughters, ours is a lifelong struggle. My prayer is that you'll be able to pick up from where some of us will end. It doesn't get better, but there's a lot of excitement when you achieve something. Change is possible, and I think all of us should strive to be change makers. Yeah, I think this is what I can say to my daughter.
Thank you, Brenda, so much. I know we kind of took the opportunity while we are writing to just get a bit of your life, get a sense of where you're going with your writing, and hopefully in the next couple of months or years, we will be able to lay our hands on the work that we are working on, the book that is, and many others, your daughter Nandi and others will be able to use as a legacy that you leave behind for them. Thank you for the work that you do at the at the global level, bringing together global voices, especially those from the South. But also thank you for mentoring some of the young people who are coming up and looking up to you. And so with that, I want to thank the Adɔyɛ initiative, which is the CAPSI initiative that has put together a platform for women who are working on philanthropy issues to also come together, and we have several of them who are part of this writing retreat. And so we are going to dedicate this series of conversation to Adɔyɛ, the African women in philanthropy.
I should also mention, Becky, that I'm a farmer. I have been running a dairy farm since 2008. It's been an interesting journey with a lot of triumphs. One of the things that I'm working towards within my farming community is actually to see how we can move from being a milk producing community to a milk processing community. I'm hoping to draw a lot of lessons. So if you know of anything or any farmers that can help us achieve this vision of being producers and processors, I think please let me know.
Yeah, I think we'll have a second episode with you, definitely to talk about farming and women in farming for that matter. And Tandy sitting there, her master's thesis was women and farmers in Limpopo. But also with the notion of philanthropy. So I think there's a lot that we should talk about. So let's dedicate a second episode, either before we leave here or when I come to New York, we'll find time to dedicate it specifically on farming.
I have a lot to share. Yeah. I would be more than... Tandy, we can do that for sure.
Yeah. Thank you again. Once again, that was Brenda Mofya joining us here at the sidelines of the Writing Retreat. A platform that women from across the globe and across experiences have come together to reflect in the beginning of year 2025. Brenda is the head of the Oxfam International office in New York. interfacing with the United Nations. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.